Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, just came back from some eat stuff from family. Hopefully you all are having a great day. I've been having a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Until of course I saw my good old friend the Steam Deck. Now thankfully, you know what? Positive news over here. It's available to buy. You can buy a Steam Deck. The problem? Well, look at those prices. Ooh. $1,200, almost, well, $1,100 for the 512 OLED and $1,300 Canadian for the terabyte OLED. Now I'll let you do the price conversions to whatever your local currency is, but basically when I bought the old Steam Deck, we are looking at a device that is, I think, $300 more expensive than when it actually dropped. Now before we get into this, I'm a huge lover of the Steam Deck. I think it's one of the best pieces of hardware that I bought. For full context sake, before the Steam Deck, my preferable console when I used to go anywhere to travel was basically the PlayStation Vita. For anybody that doesn't have the original PlayStation OLED Vita, this is one of the best goddamn handhelds you can get. Sony completely ignored the fuck out of this. I guess they didn't just market it as well as Nintendo. But back in the day, I made a whole video where I showed you how to hack this, and I was running Nintendo emulators, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, N64. I was playing, PlayStation 1 games. I was playing, games like the Sly Collection, the Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. I mean, this thing was a gaming powerhouse. And of course, ultimately, it retired from my usage once I ended up getting the Steam Deck. Because ladies and gentlemen, with a simple program like EmuDeck, half of my Steam Deck storage space is just old emulated titles. If you ever look at my game time for it, I don't know if I can show it to you graph-wise, I'd say 60% of what I play on the Steam Deck is just emulated PlayStation 2 stuff. I play a lot of older retro games on this, not to say that I don't play newer stuff like Forza or 007. I mean, both those games still run pretty damn well on an actual Steam Deck. But for me, playing a lot of independent games, old PC games, things like Freelancer, where the controller on the Steam Deck is so customizable that I can map everything to like an old school PC game that didn't have controller support and just have a fucking great time. This is an amazing device. The problem is, I really can't recommend it at the fucking prices that we're looking at right now. Now, before we continue into this video is kind of a deeper dive into, again, a topic that I've kind of been talking about for the last 2 years in terms of how artificial intelligence and these big tech companies have basically ruined the ability for you and I to own our own computers, right? So when I ended up getting the Steam Deck, it was a substantially cheaper device. In fact, if you look at the actual other comparative devices like the MSI Claws and the Legion Go's, some of these devices are up there in the $2,200 price tag range, showing that these handheld computers, in a lot of cases, are just too fucking expensive. The Steam Deck has now gotten so expensive, Canadian-wise, that you could probably look at the Xbox Ally X, which is substantially faster than the Steam Deck. You could probably install Linux onto this too, get the similar experience. That is a better device, and again, we're reaching those competitive prices. Why the fuck would I buy a $1,300 Steam Deck when I can buy the $1,500 Xbox Ally X and then actually just install Linux right onto it? I get the same experience as the Steam Deck, but it's just substantial. This thing could probably run something like Metal Gear Solid 4 emulated, even though that's not really that big of a deal. That game's coming out in like a month. So yeah, things have gotten pretty fucking expensive. And for somebody like me that was already thinking of maybe picking up the actual Steam machine because it would be a fun thing to talk about on the channel, it'd be a fun little device to put underneath the living room. If the Steam Deck is that expensive, how expensive is the fucking Steam machine gonna be, ladies and gentlemen? There were a lot of people who were like, man, I can't get a game. You know what would be great? If somebody could just give me a gaming computer right off the bat. This was Valve, one of the largest gaming companies in the world, producing basically a Linux desktop computer for people to just grab and play. The GameCube. And now I'm worried if this thing is even going to be adequately priced, which I don't think it will. Based on the prices we've seen, this thing could probably be like $2,000 Canadian for crying out loud, okay? It could be that fucking expensive. So ultimately, at the end of the day, Who is to blame? Is Valve being a greedy company? I would say that comparatively to like PlayStation, Microsoft, and Nintendo, they probably have had the largest hardware jump. And there's a lot of reasons for it, right? For one, Nintendo is pretty good with the Switch and Switch 2. Like, I think if it did have a price increase, it was probably around like $50, which isn't really bad considering the Switch 2 is a pretty decent handheld gaming system. You know, in terms of the power, like, it's definitely stronger than the actual Steam Deck. And for a lot of people who want to get access to these things right now, they sell them everywhere in stores, so you can just grab that. $50 increases, it happens because things just get more expensive. For PlayStation, prices have been going up. In fact, I don't think the prices going up is going to stop anytime soon. And for Xbox, same thing as well. For Valve, I think the jump is a little bit higher than the rest because ultimately Valve is not like a company that is selling Steam Decks to really compete with the masses. The Steam Decks are not like the craziest sellers. I think somewhere around total it has been like 5 million something hardware sales, which obviously isn't the biggest business for Valve. So clearly, you know, these companies, depending on how into the weeds they are with the business, you know, they sell all of these products on a loss. So the reason why Valve is upping it a lot more is because ultimately they were taking a loss, and generally these companies, when they sell hardware, they sell, like, for instance, a PlayStation for, like, let's say $300, even though it probably cost them $400 to make the system, right? They're selling at a loss because they know you're probably going to buy a controller or a game alongside with it and make up that cost or that loss somewhere else. So Valve, obviously they were making up their loss on people buying decks, maybe buying a few games on Steam, and then making up that loss per unit. Ultimately, at the end, you still have to up the prices when the entire market is so fucked hardware-wise that memory, that storage, that processor, every single computer component is fucking expensive through the roof. And ultimately, companies like Sony and Microsoft can weather anything. They can basically, they're just genuinely like a rich company, far richer than Sony, Nintendo, or Valve ever could be. And ultimately, for them, they can weather their storms, even though they're not, you know, immune to this stuff either. The issue is also sourcing a lot of these parts too, even for companies like Microsoft and Valve, Nintendo and Sony. Buying all of these things at bulk is tough because you're competing against the big AI bros and you're competing against this massive market of people that just have tons of cash to throw around. With PlayStation, yeah, prices go up. They can't just throw them through the roof because obviously the backlash associated sucks. Some companies can get away with, you know, basically eating more of the cost. It's complicated, right? Ultimately, you have to be a bean counter at any of these companies to understand just how impacted they are. But the point of it, the similarity really, is the fact that these systems are becoming much more difficult to make because the parts associated have become that much more fucking expensive. I think a great video by Gamers Nexus, about 3.5 hours long, you can actually see Steve going into the idea of the collapse of personal computing. And this is something that I've been talking about for quite a while now, ever since this AI market has sort of completely decimated people's hardware ownership, right? Now, again, buying a stick of RAM, buying a hard drive, buying a GPU, a lot of these things have unfortunately been expensive for a long time. Since COVID, you know, there have been situations where crypto bros decided to get into the market. They were purchasing GPUs. So if you were in the space that we're in, purchasing a graphics card genuinely became annoying because a lot of these crypto bros ended up buying GPUs so they could use to crypto mine and do all of their pointless shenanigans with. Now you've got the AI bros buying every single component to stick into data centers and basically run these massive cloud frontier AIs. They might be like, but Muda, are these AI guys buying the memory that you and I buy? No. But ultimately, companies like OpenAI pull these orders, or at least write letters of intent. They don't even really buy, they just say they want to buy something, where they go into the market before these like memories and before these like wafers are processed, and they put these giant buy orders that screw the market for all of us. So a lot of these companies, some of them which have actually left the PC space because their big time vendor is in the data center market, they're just not selling to the consumer anymore. And for some of the PC manufacturers out there, it's genuinely depressing. And again, I don't like to give you pointless, depressing news, but this is something that I think people should understand why it's happening, right? So a lot of these big PC manufacturers, people making these components, may end up going out of business sometime in the next year or very, very soon, right? This is how fucked the market kind of is. Now, a few months ago, I did talk about, well, really at the beginning of this year, guys like Jeff Bezos proudly went onto stage and talked about how, it was great if people could start renting things like cloud space instead of actually purchasing computers. So ultimately, and I want to read this entire thing, by the way, too. He basically said he went to a brewery in Luxembourg many years ago. In fact, this trip was one of the tiny little catalysts for the founding of AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, the big data centers that basically run a vast amount of the internet. And a lot of people use this. Actually is AWS is kind of Amazon's big moneymaker, right? They run huge data centers that keep the internet alive. And through this, they run other compute-heavy tasks like AI. So the brewery was 300 years old. A lot of the oldest companies in the world are breweries, by the way. I don't know why that is. They were very proud of their history and had a museum. And in the museum, there was an electric power generator, 100 years old. And because when they wanted to improve the efficiency of their brewery with electricity, there was no power grid. So they had to build their own power station. So they made their own electricity. And at that time, that's what everybody did. If a hotel wanted electricity, they had their own electric generator. And I looked at this and I thought, this is what computation is like today. Everyone has their own data center, and that's not going to last. It makes no sense. So he's comparing the time he goes to a fucking brewery and he gets a beer and he thinks, well, guys, computers are a lot like purchasing a food item that you get rid of into your belly in 10 minutes? No, I think this comparison is actually batshit insane. We do not just own data centers in our home. We own computers. We own personal computers. Devices that we locally compute stuff on. When you run a game on your computer, an offline game, it's running on your own local hardware. You own what's running on that computer. When you stream a video in your house to your living room, you're not using somebody else's services like Netflix, like Amazon, like anyone else. You are streaming from your own hard drive in your own server or computer to some other client in your home. And same could be said for a lot of other internal compute things in your home. When he says it doesn't make any sense, yeah, it makes no sense if you want people to subscribe to unnecessary constant subscription services that change on any fucking whim depending on how these companies feel. I feel like a lot of people have realized how annoying subscription services have become. It's one of the things where let's say you subscribe to something like Game Pass or PlayStation, I think it's Plus, they have a special subscription too. The prices go up, and sometimes you just notice the game quality or what you're getting in return goes lesser and lesser. It was great when it started, but now that these companies have millions of users, they can basically rug pull you and charge you higher and higher costs for less and less things. It's like going to Netflix, right? One of the reasons why I don't use cloud streaming services anymore is I remember I was watching the show called Dexter on Netflix. And, it was basically all that I used Netflix for, that and Breaking Bad. So I realized, isn't it just cheaper in the long run for me to buy the entire season of Dexter, for instance, rip it onto my home drive, and just stream it anywhere that I am in the world and inside my home network? That would be a better option. And again, I was proven right when, again, I went back to Netflix and I was like, oh, I want to watch Dexter. Oh, they're removing the entire show from the service. So I'm paying the same amount. They just get to put and remove whatever the fuck it is that they want. So instead of paying that amount to a company that just changes their shit all the time, I might as well just buy the product once, the DVD or Blu-rays, rip them onto my system, and just play them anywhere that I am or inside my home at fucking 4K, HDR, all that shit. You know what I mean? It's a lot like with older PC games. One of the things that I think sucks about a lot of modern games, and even games that I just bought a couple days ago, like 007 First Light, you can buy the physical disc, and even though the game is 50 gigs, can easily fit on a Blu-ray, they don't have the entire game just on the disc 1.0. So you typically need an internet connection to basically install the game. You need connection to a server to make this, single player game work at some point during the install process. And you might be like, what's the big deal with that? Well, it kills your ownership if 10, 15 years down the road, if those servers aren't available and you want to just put that disc into your PlayStation or Xbox and just play that from the disc, start to finish, like I've already done with a lot of games, right? This is where the industry is unfortunately kind of headed. I think one of the grossest things that I've sort of seen is the discussion of gaming rentals. So companies like HP have started to do things where you rent gaming laptops at $50 a month, for instance, right? That's where it starts. So I'm going to show you how shit this entire model is. It's basically what I call, I call this like poverty predation almost. Like I think that's the appropriate term. Basically, you go to the Omen gaming subscription, and HP has this thing where you get a new gaming laptop and I guess gear. You upgrade after 12 months. And to give you an idea of what you get, they give you things that are like the everyday Victus 15 all the way to the Omen Max 16-inch laptop. So I looked at the Omen Max 16-inch laptop and it's at about $129 a month. So doing the quick little math on this, ladies and gentlemen, if you did $129.99 multiplied by 12, you're looking at about, what, $15.60, like, round up. That's an insane amount of money. You are spending money on a computer that you do not fucking own. To give you an idea of what this laptop costs, you can get it on sale right now for $1849.99. So instead of, paying a little bit extra, you can even fucking finance the thing, for crying out loud. You can own the laptop or you can rent it. In fact, again, this is a saving. The original laptop is still $2,500, but you get the idea. You're still pissing away $1,560 for no fucking reason. And what is HP's explanation for this, by the way, too? They say, is it worth it? They say, is this subscription worth it? For many gamers, the answer is yes. No, it's not. The traditional upgrade cycle keeps most gamers perpetually one step behind. But with access to a new laptop every year, your Omen gaming subscription breaks that cycle completely, ensuring your hardware evolves as rapidly as the latest games do. They're trying to sell you on the fact that you need a new fucking laptop every year for the new AAA game that drops, even though that's not the case whatsoever. You can still run a lot of modern games on hardware that is older, a few years at this point. Yeah, sure, it won't run at the flashiest settings or the highest frame rates, but it's quite playable enough in many cases. So ultimately, when I see companies like this sell this idea, it drives me insane because I know deep down it might actually be working because of how out of stock every single one of these options are. But you should never rent your compute, okay? We're getting to a point where these companies are feeling real fucking comfortable with taking away your ownership and just letting you rent your computers. Because at what point is it going to shift from at least you get the hardware to, hey, let's go into the future where you have to connect to hp.com/gaming or something, log into your account, and stream your gaming computer through a web browser. I feel like a lot of people can be conditioned into that because they'll be told your computer automatically upgrades in the cloud. You have full access anywhere you go from any browser, except you don't even fucking own the computer that you bought. You don't own the software on that computer that you bought. I would much rather own the first gaming computer that I ever had when I started my YouTube channel, when I was recording haunted gaming videos, the gaming computer that couldn't even run Battlefield 3 at 1080p Ultra. I was running that game at it was a 4:3 resolution. I was playing at 40, 50 frames. It was like that first computer I had like a GT 640, okay? Even though it couldn't run any of those games at maximum settings, it's what I kind of put together at the time on the super cheap. And I would rather own that than a rented computer because at least there I own the fucking hardware, right? It's kind of fucking scary and depressing that we're entering a situation where hardware is so expensive that companies like Valve can't make these systems somewhat affordable because they can't even source the hardware to build this stuff at scale and make it affordable for the average gamer, right? So we all fucking suffer, Because ultimately, this world is unfortunately being grabbed by the balls from AI bros and big billionaires that would rather you stick to subscription services than actually own what you have. Because if you owned your stuff, you could then have some say in what you purchase from these assholes, right? You know, a lot of other things also kind of come into the mix too. Like, let's not forget, oil prices have gone through the roof. There are huge economic issues that are causing everything to become more expensive. And even though there are cases where you've got the Chinese coming in with like their own like RAM modules, so instead of just like a few companies making it, now you have the Chinese hopefully flooding the market. But before people say, but Muda, what if this runs Chinese malware? Dog, I don't give a fuck whose malware. Either I'm running Chinese malware or I'm running fucking NSA malware, okay? So either I have the Chinese looking into my shit or a fucking, or a nation run by pedos, okay, looking into my stuff. It doesn't really fucking matter to me whose malware I'm fucking running, you know? As long as I can afford and build the computer at a reasonable price, not like 50, 60% markups, I'll buy from whoever is giving me a good fucking deal, right? That's the American way at the end of the day, right? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fucked situation to be looking into. You know, I don't want to blame Valve, Nintendo, PlayStation, Sony or Microsoft, because ultimately their systems are getting more expensive because that's just the business we're in. Nobody wants to make their shit more expensive and suffer the backlash. Ultimately, if something costs $600, it's going to cost $600 for all of us. And so these companies, they can only pass the loss on so much, right? They have to, the bean counters put this stuff together very much, you know, these people are highly fucking educated, highly fucking incentivized to find the best number. And unfortunately, that best number is now this high. So yeah, that's kind of the situation we're fucking sitting at. And, you know, is it gonna get better? I fucking hope so. I really do. You know, like, I don't make these videos because I like to doom about the situation. It's not the dooming. Who enjoys dooming? But the thing is, I feel like people should understand what's going on, you know, above in the background. This is not a conspiratorial thing. This is not me pushing a conspiracy theory of you will own nothing and you will be happy. It's literally happening in front of you, okay? So you might as well acknowledge that it exists, and you might as well, I don't know, talk to your fucking representative. Or just get used, honestly, like, this is the only advice, just get used to owning a dog shit computer for a few years now, okay? Because at least you get to own that, as opposed to the future of fucking renting your hardware and whatnot. If you're complaining about a $1,000 Steam Deck right now, you might have to get used to seeing $2,000 budget computers and fuck whatever the enthusiast option is, if there is even the ability to buy that stuff, because hardware manufacturers are poised to be looking to fucking die out soon anyways, right? At least in the consumer market. So yeah, wild shit, man. Insane world when we got, okay, in front of us. You know, it's to a point where when you look at PC gaming, it might not even be such a bad economic choice to buy like a PS5 Pro or something, or like a Switch 2, or like a fucking Xbox Series X or some shit. Because at least for now, while those are still priced high, they're more subsidized than a lot of the PC market and Steam Decks as well out there. It's a shit show. It really is. But at least you know why it's a shit show. So how do we get out of this shit show? Well, it's time to just raise awareness. It's time to educate people that this technology, that's sort of this fancy autocomplete technology, that's, and I'm just going to call it that because really at the end of the day, that's all I see it as, is kind of eating up everything. And yeah, I think it's worth educating people on what it's doing to everything surrounding it, okay? So ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.